In the winter of 1983, deep in the Registan desert borderlands of southern Afghanistan, a Soviet Spetsnaz GRU reconnaissance squad, call sign Kyra 3, walked into a cave system near the village of Kakrez, Kandahar province, and was never seen again. 12 men, elite operators from the 459th Separate Spetsnaz Company, armed with suppressed AKMS rifles, night vision goggles, radio direction-finding gear, and enough explosives to level a Mujahideen caravan. Their mission was simple: locate a suspected Mujahideen weapons cache hidden inside an ancient cave network used since the time of Alexander the Great. At 21:17 hours on 11th of December 1983, Kyra 3 transmitted their last radio message. Control, this is Kyra 3. We have eyes on the target entrance. Temperature drop abnormal. Proceeding inside, out. After that, silence. No gunfire on the net. No distress beacon. No bodies ever recovered. Soviet search teams found only their abandoned Gaz-66 truck. Engine still warm. Radios intact. Weapons racked and magazines full. Inside the cave mouth, boot prints that walked in, but never walked out. For 42 years, the Soviet and later Russian Ministry of Defense classified the incident. Veterans whispered about it only in barracks after lights out. Locals still refuse to go near the place. They call the cave Gar-e-Shaitan, the Devil's House. Tonight, for the first time in public, 3 surviving Soviet veterans who were on the follow-up search operation in 1983 and 1 former Mujahideen guide who watched from afar break their silence. What they describe inside that mountain does not fit any official report. It does not fit any rational explanation. Chapter 1. The orders came at night. My name is Anatoly Viktorovich Demchenko. In December 1983, I was a senior lieutenant, 2nd platoon leader, 459th Separate Spetsnaz Company, GRU. We were staged out of a wind-blasted forward operating base south of Lashkar Gah. Nothing more than frozen sandbags, razor wire, and a landing zone marked by burning diesel in cut-off drums. That night, the cold came down off the Hindu Kush like a blade. You could feel it cut straight through the quilted Telegryka jacket, through the sweater, through the skin, until it sat on your heart. Most of us were trying to sleep sitting up so our rifles would not freeze to the ground. At 2200, the company runner kicked the tent flap open and said only, "Officers and starshinas to the command tent, now." Inside, the kerosene lamp swung from the ridgepole and threw long shadows across the map table. Major Gurov stood waiting, greatcoat unbuttoned, face gray with exhaustion. I had never seen him smoke in front of subordinates, but that night he had a Belomorcanol glued to his lower lip, and the ashtray was already full. On the table lay a single topographic sheet with a red grease pencil circle around grid 41R PR 684-119, a mountain the locals marked only as Koe-Shaitan. Gurov did not waste words. Kyra 3 is gone. 12 men. Last radio contact 21 hours ago. Their truck sits abandoned 400 meters from the cave mouth. Engine still warm. Weapons racked. No brass, no blood, no bodies. Tomorrow at 1st Light, 2nd, and 3rd platoons, insert by MI-8. Locate the squad or what is left of it. Destroy the reported weapons cache and get out. Expect heavy Dushman activity in the valley. He slid a stack of reconnaissance photographs across the table. I picked up the top one and felt the tent tilt. The Gaz-66 sat alone in moonlight, driver's door hanging open. You could see the frost feathers on the windshield and the faint glow of the dashboard lights still on. In the foreground were boot prints, crisp Soviet winter tread patterns, leading in a loose column from the tailgate straight toward the black hole of the cave. 40, maybe 45 meters of prints. Then nothing. The sand was undisturbed beyond that point, as though the men had stepped off the edge of the world. I looked up. "Comrade Major, the Hinds did a thermal pass." Gurov took a long drag, exhaled toward the tent roof. At 0400, the cave mouth registered 12 degrees colder than ambient air temperature. In December, at night, in the desert. That is not possible. He let that sit there while the lamp hissed. Someone asked about the QRF that reached the truck first. Gurov's answer was short. They refused to enter the cave. All 6 men. The political officer threatened them with a tribunal. They still refused, said the mountain was watching them. I remember the silence after that. You could hear the wind clawing at the canvas and the faint clatter of someone outside racking the bolt of an AKS-74 over and over, the way men do when their hands need something to hold. Gurov tapped the map again. We go in with 2 platoons, 64 rifles, 4 AGS-17 teams, and every demolition charge in the regiment. If the Dutchmans are waiting, we will give them a very bad day. If they are not... He did not finish the sentence. We filed out into the cold. Nobody spoke. I passed the motor pool and saw the sappers already loading crates of TNT and plastic explosive onto the flatbeds, moving like they were handling the dead. Back in the platoon tent, my men were awake, sitting on ammo boxes, cleaning weapons that were already clean. Sergeant Sidorenko was oiling the same magazine spring for the 10th time. When I ducked inside, he looked up and asked the question none of us wanted answered. "Comrade Lieutenant, what happens if we find them and they are not dead in a way the report cannot explain?" I told him the truth. "Then we carry them out anyway. Spetsnaz does not leave its own." He nodded slowly, clicked the magazine home, and worked the action once. The metallic snap sounded too loud in the quiet. That night, no one slept. Some men wrote letters and handed them to the Feldsher without a word. Others checked the batteries in their night vision, goggles again and again, until the plastic grew warm. I sat on my cot and cleaned the PBS-1 suppressor I had never once needed in anger, wondering why my hands would not stop shaking. Outside, the wind died just before dawn and the mountains went perfectly still. For a moment, the whole world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do when the helicopters came. We were about to feed the mountain, and the mountain, I think, was already hungry. Chapter 2. The village that wouldn't speak my name is Gul Ahmad. In December 1983, I was 19, thin as a switch, and already wanted by both the Qad and the Mujahideen for running ammunition across the Iranian border. The Soviets caught me outside Lashkar Gah with 2 mules loaded with Chinese 107 Mir rockets. Instead of the usual bullet in the back of the head, a Spetsnaz captain with pale eyes offered me 5,000 Afghanis to guide a column to the mountain the Pashtun call Kohe Shaitan. I took the money. A man has to eat. They picked me up at dawn in a UAZ 469, hands zip-tied, sack over my head until we were well clear of the city. When they finally pulled it off, I was sitting in the back seat between 2 silent operators who smelled of gun oil and frost. The officer in the front passenger seat, later I learned his name was Demchenko, handed me a photograph of the cave mouth and said in bad Pashto, "You take us here, you stay alive. You run, you die tired." We drove until the road turned into a goat track, then walked the last 8 kilometers single file, me in the middle so I could not bolt. The snow started as soft flakes, then came sideways, sharp as broken glass. By the time we reached the village of Kakrez, the wind was screaming down the valley like a living thing. Kakrez was only 20 mud houses and a small mosque, but when we appeared, every door slammed shut at once. Then the elders came out, old men with beards to their belts and eyes like winter, and planted themselves across the path. They did not carry rifles. They did not need to. One of them, Haji Nur Muhammad, stepped forward and spoke directly to Demchenko through me. "Turn back, Russian. The mountain has taken its fill for this year. Do not make it greedy." Demchenko smiled the way a wolf smiles and told me to translate, "Tell the old man if he blocks a Soviet military operation again, he will spend the rest of his life counting pine trees in Siberia." I translated. Haji Nur Muhammad spat in the snow and said something I did not pass on. "The mountain does not care about your red flag. It only cares how loud you scream." That night, we camped in a dry wadi 800 meters short of the cave. The Russians posted guards every 50 meters, trip flares, claymores, the whole textbook. I was tied to the wheel of a Gaz 66 with just enough rope to lie down. The cold was beyond anything I had ever known. It felt like the air itself had teeth. At some point after midnight, the wind simply stopped. One moment it was howling, the next, nothing. Even the generators seemed quieter. Then every dog in Kakrez began to bark at once, a frantic, desperate sound that rose and fell like a siren. The guards swung their weapons toward the village, but there was nothing to see. The barking went on for maybe 5 minutes, then cut off as suddenly as it started. In that new silence, we heard the other sound. It came from under the ground, soft at first, like a woman weeping far away. then louder, rising through the rock itself until it filled the wadi. It was not wind, it was not human, it was grief and hunger and something ancient recognizing fresh meat. Every Russian in the camp was on his feet, rifle up, scanning. One young soldier near me crossed himself over and over, muttering in Ukrainian. The sound lasted maybe 30 seconds, then dropped away into nothing. I looked toward the village. Not a single light, not a single dog barking now, just blackness. At first light, we moved out. Kakre's was empty. Doors hung open, cooking fires still smoked. Tea was still hot in the pots. Goats wandered untethered. An old woman's chador lay in the snow where she had dropped it while running. The Russians cursed and kicked in a few doors looking for snipers, but the place had been abandoned in minutes, in total silence, in the dark. Demchenko stood in the middle of the street, staring at a child's sandal half buried in snow. He said, very quietly, "They knew we were coming to feed it." I told him, "No Russian. They knew you were coming to be the food." He looked at me for a long time, then turned toward the mountain that waited above us, black against the pale sky, patient as ever. We started walking. Behind us, the village stayed dead and silent, and the snow began to cover the footprints of everyone who had fled in the night. Chapter 3. Footprints that ended. My name is Pyotr Ivanovich Sidorenko, Sergeant Combat Engineer, 459th Spetsnaz. In 1983, I was 24, fresh from the sapper school at Churchik, and still believed explosives could solve every problem the motherland gave me. We lifted off from Lashkar Gah at 0615 in two Mi-8s, doors open, legs dangling in the rotor wash. The pilots flew nap of the earth the whole way, skimming ridges so close I could see startled ibex scattering. Two Mi-24s orbited overhead like angry hornets, but the cloud ceiling was dropping fast and they were burning fuel they could not spare. We touched down hard on a knife-edge ridge 2 kilometers west of the objective. Rotors still turning, we spilled out in fire teams and moved downhill in bounds, weapons up, expecting contact any second. Nothing. No sniper rounds cracking past, no RPGs, just the crunch of frost under our boots and the low whistle of wind across rock. When we reached the abandoned Gaz 66, I felt the first real twist in my gut. The truck sat exactly as the photographs showed, but photographs do not tell you how wrong a familiar thing can feel. The engine was still warm enough that when I laid my bare hand on the metal stung. A tin mug of coffee on the dash had a skin of ice across the top, yet steam still rose from the spout. The driver's seat belt was still fastened, cut cleanly with a knife so whoever sat there could slip out fast. The weapons were the worst. 12 AKMS rifles with PBS-1 suppressors, 2 SVDs, 1 PKM, all racked in perfect order, bolts forward on empty chambers, magazines seated but not a single round missing. Even the spare barrels for the machine gun were wrapped in oiled cloth exactly as regulations demanded. I have seen men die in ambushes. I have seen vehicles burn. I have never seen soldiers walk away from their weapons like that. Then we saw the tracks. From the tailgate to the cave mouth, 43 meters across loose gravel and wind-blown sand, 12 distinct sets of Soviet winter boots, marched in textbook staggered column, deep heel prints, clear tread pattern, no dragging, no running, no hesitation. At the 38-meter mark, the prints simply stopped. Not faded, stopped. The last print of each man was perfect, weight on the ball of the foot as if mid-stride, and then nothing. The ground beyond was smooth as a parade square. I knelt and brushed the snow aside with my glove. No disturbance under the surface, no tunnel collapse, no scrape marks from dragging bodies. I lined my own boot up next to the final print of Lieutenant Colonel Marchenko, size 43, same as mine. The tread matched exactly. The depth was the same. It was as though the mountain had reached up and lifted them straight into itself. Demchenko ordered us into the cave. We stacked at the entrance, checked chambers, switched on weapon lights. The temperature drop hit like walking into a freezer. My nostrils stuck together on the first breath. The rock walls were black volcanic glass, black and glossy, throwing our lights back in 1,000 fractured beams. 50 meters in, we found their rucksacks. 12 of them laid out side by side with parade ground precision. Flaps open, contents untouched. Spare socks still rolled, tins of Tushonka unopened, demolition charges sealed in factory plastic. Even the morphine syrettes were still in their cardboard sleeves. On top of Marchenko's rucksack lay his notebook. I opened it with gloved fingers. The last entry, written in neat officer handwriting, read, "Twythysethur 3 Ferrisers air temp inside, 19 stationaries and falling, walls humming at 18 Hertz. Men report vertigo. Proceeding to chamber." The next page was covered in a single repeated phrase, scrawled harder and harder until the pen tore the paper. "They are already here." That was when Corporal Volodya Kravchuk dropped his rifle and began reciting the Lord's Prayer in Ukrainian. The sound echoed off the glass walls until it sounded like 100 voices praying at once. Demchenko slapped him hard. "Pick it up, Corporal. We are not finished." We moved deeper. The tunnel narrowed, then suddenly opened into a cavern so large our lights could not find the ceiling. In the center stood something that made every man freeze. A waist-high stone plinth, perfectly smooth, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. On it rested Kyra 3's radio handset, red transmit lights still blinking slowly, impossibly, after 21 hours. Our own radio operator reached for it. That was the exact moment the screaming started. Chapter 4. The Chamber of Mirrors. The cavern we entered was wrong in every way a place can be wrong. The air was so cold, but it moved like something breathing. Our lights did not behave properly. They stretched too far, then snapped back, as if the darkness itself was deciding what we were allowed to see. The walls were polished obsidian, seamless, curving upward until they vanished. Every surface reflected every other surface, so when you turned, you saw yourself turning 100 times, 1,000, each reflection a fraction slower than the real movement. After 10 seconds, the effect made you seasick. After 30, it made you want to claw your own eyes out. In the center stood the plinth Sidorenko mentioned, a single block of black stone, glassy stone, no tool marks, no joints. The symbols carved into it were not Arabic, not Persian, not cuneiform, nothing any of us had ever seen. They seemed to shift when you tried to focus on them, like fish sliding under dark water. On top of the plinth lay the missing squad's R105M radio handset. The red transmit lamp still pulsed, once every 4 seconds, steady as a heartbeat. The battery should have been flat 20 hours earlier. Our radio man, Sergeant Kovalenko, reached for it without orders. I should have stopped him. I did not. The moment his gloved fingers closed around the plastic, the speaker crackled alive with Marchenko's voice, calm and professional, exactly as I remembered it from countless exercises. "Control, this is Kyra 3. We have located the cache. Jackpot. Ammunition crates, stingers, explosives, enough to supply an entire front. Request immediate extract and—" A pause. Then the same voice, quieter, almost curious. "Wait. Something is moving in the walls. Repeat. We have movement in the transmission dissolved into screaming. Not pain, not fear. Recognition. 12 voices realizing something at the same instant, all of them screaming the same note, perfectly in unison, until the speaker distorted and cut out. Kovalenko dropped the handset like it burned him. It hit the stone floor but did not break, and the red light kept blinking. That was when the reflections changed. I saw it first in my peripheral vision. A second Demchenko, standing 10 meters behind the real one, rifle raised, but the face under the helmet was wrong. Mouth stretched too wide, eyes just empty sockets reflecting my own flashlight back at me. I spun. Nothing there. When I turned back, the reflection was gone. But now every man in the platoon had the same. Second shadow standing just out of sync. Private Aslanov from Grozny lost it first. He screamed something in Chechen and opened fire full auto into the nearest wall, 30 rounds in under 3 seconds. The muzzle flash strobed white across the mirrors. Brass spun glittering through the air, and the sound was so loud it felt like the mountain itself roared back. When the bolt locked open, the wall was unmarked. Not a chip, not a scratch. And every casing that should have been on the floor hung suspended in front of us, spinning slowly, catching the light like golden snowflakes. Then, one by one, they dropped straight down and rang on the stone, perfect delayed echo. Aslanov stared at his magazine, still full, selector still unsafe. He had not fired a single round, yet the smell of burnt powder choked the air, and every one of us had watched the tracer rounds stitch across the glass. I ordered the platoon to fall back to the tunnel mouth in pairs. Nobody argued. As we retreated, I risked one last look over my shoulder. In every reflection, the 12 missing men of Kyra 3 were now standing around the plinth, backs to us, heads bowed as if in prayer. Their uniforms were perfect. Not a tear, not a bloodstain, but their shadows on the floor stretched wrong, too long, too thin, reaching toward us like fingers. When I blinked, they were gone. We stumbled back into the narrow tunnel. Behind us, the cavern lights dimmed of their own accord, until the only illumination came from our shaking torches. The temperature kept falling. Frost formed on the inside of my eyelids. Halfway out, we found the single handprint in blood on the wall, still wet, still warm. 5 fingers, perfect print, at shoulder height. No trail leading to it, no trail leading away. I pressed my own gloved hand over it. The fit was exact. That was when I understood we were not searching for Kyra 3 anymore. We were being herded. Chapter 5. What came out wasn't them. I stayed outside with the drivers and the wounded. The Russians had chained me to the front bumper of the second Gaz 66, so I could not run. The sun was high, but it gave no warmth. My fingers had gone numb hours earlier. The only sound was the wind whirring the prayer flags the villagers had left behind when they fled. At approximately 11:07, the ground shook once, hard, like a mortar round detonating deep underground. Dust puffed from the cave mouth and rolled down the slope toward us in a gray wave. The drivers jumped out with rifles ready, shouting at each other to watch the ridges. Then came the noise. It started low, almost below hearing, a vibration in the teeth and bones. Then it rose into a single drawn-out chord made of human voices, but stretched and twisted until they no longer sounded like men. It was every scream that mountain had ever swallowed, played back at once. Even the Russians went pale under their frost and dirt. The drivers began reversing the trucks, engines roaring, trying to put distance between themselves and the cave. One UAZ stalled. The driver leapt out and ran on foot down the valley. Then they appeared. 12 figures stepped out of the darkness in perfect 2-rank formation. Soviet winter camouflage, white against black rock. Rifles slung exactly regulation distance from the body. Movement smooth, almost gliding. They did not crunch snow under their boots. They passed over it like it was not there. They walked straight to the abandoned Gaz 66 of Kyra 3, climbed in without a word, started the engine first try, and began driving down the track, as if returning from a routine patrol. I was close enough to see their faces when the truck rolled past me. No eyes, just polished black glass where eyes should have been, reflecting my own face back at me. Distorted, screaming though my mouth was closed. The driver, things, never looked at me. They stared straight ahead, hands at exact 10 and 2 on the wheel, and the truck moved away down the mountain road without raising dust. 5 minutes later, the real survivors burst from the cave mouth. Only 9 now. Demchenko in the lead, faced the color of candle wax, dragging Private Aslanov by the collar. The rest staggered behind, some without rifles, some without helmets, all covered in thick white frost that did not melt even when the sun struck it. Demchenko saw the empty parking spot where Kyra 3's truck had been. He stopped dead, stared at the tire tracks, already half filled by wind, then turned to me and screamed in Russian so broken I barely understood. "Did you see them? Did you see them leave?" I could only nod. He dropped to his knees and vomited a stream of dark blood that hissed when it hit the snow and froze into black crystals before my eyes. The men who still had strength began destroying everything. They dragged the 12 rucksacks into a pile and soaked them with diesel from the jerry cans. They poured the remaining coffee from the thermos onto the stone plinth they carried out piece by piece, then wired every kilogram of TNT and PE4 we had brought. I begged them not to. In Pashto, in Dari, in the little Russian I knew. The mountain wants fire. Fire only feeds it. Demchenko looked at me with eyes that were already dead and said, "Then let it choke." They detonated from 200 meters. The explosion was enormous, orange and black against the white slope, rolling thunder that knocked us flat. Boulders the size of cars tumbled past. When the smoke cleared, the cave mouth was still there, not even scarred. The rock looked wet, almost smiling. That night, on the helicopters out, no one spoke. The frost on their uniforms never melted. It stayed hard and glittering, even inside the warm cabin. One man, the young Ukrainian who had prayed, kept scratching at his face until his nails came away bloody. Under the skin, his cheekbones had begun to shine like polished obsidian. Demchenko sat alone in the back, staring at his bare hands. The fingertips had turned black in glassy, spreading hour by hour. He wrapped them in bandages, but we all saw. 3 weeks later, in the military hospital in Kabul, they took 3 fingers from his left hand. The surgeon told me privately the bone inside had petrified, turned to the same black volcanic glass as the cave walls. Chapter 6. The Cover-Up. We lifted off the mountain just after last light. The pilots flew blacked out. No lights, no radio. Hugging the terrain so low, the skids scraped sagebrush. Everyone sat in silence except for the turbine whine and the occasional sob from Aslanov, who had not spoken a coherent word since the mirrors. When the wheels touched down at Lashkar Gah, the base was waiting for us in a way I had never seen. Floodlights off, only red-lensed flashlights. An entire company of military counterintelligence in plain greatcoats formed 2 lines from the pad to a sealed tent. No medical orderlies, no cooks with tea. Just KGB with submachine guns held low and faces that said one wrong move, and we would disappear before morning. They took everything: film canisters, notebooks, watches. Mine had stopped at exactly 11:07. Even the frost-covered parkas we still wore. We were marched naked into showers so hot the skin peeled, then issued brand new uniforms still in depot plastic. A doctor in a chemical protection suit drew vial after vial of blood, while 2 armed guards watched. The same 3 questions over and over. Did you observe anything unusual inside the objective? Did you make unauthorized recordings? Did any man remove his dosimeter? We learned quickly to answer no, comrade doctor, to all 3. That night, they flew us to Kabul in an unmarked An-12. 48 hours of debriefing in a windowless room under the headquarters building. Same questions, new faces, sometimes a general, sometimes a civilian in a cheap suit who never gave a name. They showed us typed statements already prepared. All we had to do was sign. The official version: Kyra 3 killed in close ambush by superior Mujahideen force while attempting to seize a Stinger cache. Heavy automatic weapons fire and RPGs. Bodies unrecoverable due to cave collapse triggered by exploding ammunition. Heroic deaths. Posthumous orders of the Red Banner. I read it twice. Then I signed. Every man in the platoon signed. What else could we do? The alternative was a psychiatric ward in Tashkent and a lifetime of Thorazine drips. They kept us in quarantine 31 days. Daily lumbar punctures, daily questions. On the 15th day, they brought in Aslanov strapped to a gurney. His eyes had gone completely black, reflective, like the things we saw driving the truck. He was smiling. They took him away again, and we never saw him after that. On the 32nd morning, they loaded us onto different aircraft and scattered us across the Union. I went to a training company in Ashgabat, Sidorenko to Germany, Kovalenko to the Far East. We were forbidden to write, to telephone, to ever speak of Koa Shaitan again. My new orders were signed by a colonel I had never heard of and stamped most secret single copy. For years I obeyed. Then in 1998, after the Union was gone and the archives were burning in Moscow alleys, I went back. Civilian clothes, Pakistani visa, a Tajik driver who claimed to know every smuggler trail from Herat to the Amu Darya. The cave is still there. The Soviets, later the Russians, poured a 3-meter concrete plug across the entrance and wrapped it in razor wire. A small garrison of contract soldiers lives in prefab containers 500 meters away, officially to prevent NATO espionage. Their commander, a captain barely older than I was in '83, refused to let me closer than the wire. He said, "Grandfather, the seismic sensors go off every night. Footsteps, always 12 sets, always walking in, never out. We are paid triple hazard money to sit here and pretend we hear nothing." That night, I camped 2 kilometers away. The temperature was -20, same as before. At 02:14, the wind died exactly like it had in 1983. Then came the crying, soft, female, ancient, rising through the rock. At 02:27, I heard the trucks. 3 Ural 4320s driving without lights, coming down the mountain road from the cave. I watched through binoculars. 12 men in modern Ratnik gear climbed out, formed up, and began unloading ammunition boxes into the guarded compound. Their movements were perfect, practiced. Their faces, when the moon caught them, were black mirrors. The young captain saluted them. They saluted back. I left before dawn. Some doors even the Russian army cannot close. They only learn to feed them on schedule. Chapter 7. Some doors stay closed. I am 81 now. My beard is white, my knees crack like dry firewood, and the Russians, new Russians, young ones with soft hands and American rifles, still come looking for the cave. The last group arrived 11 months ago. 6 men in civilian Toyota Hiluxes, no plates, speaking Moscow Russian with American accents. They found me in the bazaar selling raisins and offered $10,000 cash for the exact GPS of Gari Shaitan. Green bills crisp, still banded from some bank in Dubai. I told them the same thing my grandfather told the first Soviets in 1979. The same thing I told Demchenko in 1983. The same thing I will tell my grandsons when I am gone. The cave does not need coordinates. It already knows where you are. They laughed, the way educated men always laugh at old peasants, and said they only wanted to take seismic readings. Nothing more. One of them, a woman with short hair and a scar across her throat, showed me a photograph on a tablet. The concrete plug the Russians poured in the 1990s had been blasted open from the inside. The rebar was bent outward like flower petals. I gave them tea, the way hospitality demands, then sent them away with the wrong wadi, the wrong valley, the wrong mountain entirely. 3 nights later, their convoy hit an old Soviet TM-62 mine on the exact track that leads to Gari Shaitan. The explosion lit the sky orange all the way to Herat. No survivors. The Taliban claimed responsibility, but everyone in the villages knew better. The mountain keeps its own justice. I dream about it still. In the dream, I am 19 again, chained to the truck wheel, watching the 12 eyeless things drive away in perfect formation. Only now the truck never leaves. It circles the valley floor forever. Headlights off, engine silent, tires not quite touching the ground. Every time it passes me, the driver turns his black mirror face and smiles with teeth that are not teeth. I wake up tasting blood. My wife says I scream in my sleep, but the words are never Pashto, never Dari. They are the same clicking, grinding sounds we heard inside the chamber when the walls began to speak. My youngest grandson, Noor, is 12. He asks why we never hunt ibex on the south face of Gari Shaitan the way other men do. I tell him stories about wolves, about avalanches, about ghosts of Russian soldiers who never left. He listens with big eyes and believes none of it. Last month, he came home with a piece of black glass he found in the riverbed after the spring floods. Perfectly smooth, warm to the touch even in snow. When he holds it to the sun, you can see things moving inside, shadows of men walking in a place with no light. I took it from him and threw it into the deepest part of the irrigation canal. 3 days later, it was back on the doorstep, dry, shining, waiting. That night, the dogs refused to enter the compound. They sat in a circle 50 meters away and howled at the house until dawn. I have made arrangements. When I die, they will bury me, facing away from that mountain. My sons think it is superstition. They will learn. The Russians still guard the place, or pretend to. Sometimes their patrols disappear. Sometimes new ones arrive. The cycle continues. Americans came once, years ago, with machines that hummed and lights that turned the night blue. They left faster than they came, some without their machines, some without their voices. The cave does not care who carries the rifle. It only cares that the rifle is carried toward it. If you are listening to this and you are young, if you wear any uniform, if someone offers you hazard pay to visit an old Soviet site in Kandahar province, if the coordinates begin with 41 RPR, remember my face. Remember that I have lived 60 more years than the 12 men who walked in 1983. Remember that some doors were never meant to be opened. And some doors, once they taste blood, never close again. The mountain is patient. It is still hungry. And it already knows your name.